You've made it to part 2. Congratulations, because speaking part 1 was the longest component of this course and taught most of the grammar and vocabulary you need for IELTS speaking success. To start this part of the test, the examiner will give you a cue card that first states your topic to discuss for 2 minutes. Like part 1, it's going to be about yourself. So common topics are people you know, personal possessions, something you've experienced, or a place you've gone. Written below, that are some optional things you can mention while talking. It's confusing because on the card, these optional things seem necessary because it says you should say. However, you don't have to say anything about those things, don't have to read them, and most examiners don't read them either. For many students, it's easiest to read the main question only and ignore the things you should say part to save time. We'll discuss the pros and cons of this method. Next, how to take notes. After being given your card, you have 1 minute to prepare your spoken response. It might not seem like it, but that's a lot of time. So I want to make sure you can take notes wisely because it's going to help structure your 2-minute long-term response and can be used while speaking. Then we'll look at the best strategy to talk for the entire 2 minutes, the PPF technique, or the past, present, future technique. This is a way to talk longer and easier by connecting 3 short stories. One that happens in the past, one that happens in the present, and finish with one that happens in the future. We already discussed all the grammar you need for the PPF technique in part 1A of this course. So you are more than prepared to do this. And second of all, it's very easy to do because, like I said, it's not actually one long story. We're making a different short story for each tense: past, present, future, and connecting them. After I show you how the PPF technique works, I'll give you the essential connecting vocabulary to make your 3 separate stories look like one awesome story. There's only one new grammar item in this section, and that's past tense continuous. This tense is very helpful when constructing past stories, so I'll include it here to help with the PPF technique. And finally, what you can ask the examiner during speaking part 2, as well as how to answer the very brief follow-up question, also called the rounding off question, you will be asked after giving your 2-minute response. Let's do it. Understanding the cue card. When speaking part 2 starts, this is almost exactly what the examiner will say. Okay, now we'll begin part 2. For part 2, I'm going to give you a card with some questions on it. You will have 1 minute to read the questions and prepare your answer. Here is a pencil and paper for you if you wish to take notes during that time. When the preparation time is up, I will tell you and you can begin speaking. You will have 2 minutes to speak and I will tell you when that time has finished. Do you understand? Are you ready to begin? Okay, here is your card. Go ahead and turn it over. You have 1 minute to prepare. And here is what the cue card will look like. Describe someone in your family that you are close to. That's what the examiner wants you to discuss. And I'll show you how to organize it into an easy 2-minute story. Below that are the 4 questions the card says you should answer while responding. For this type of describe a person topic, these questions will be something like, who are they? How are you related to that person? Why do you get along so well? What are they like? But remember, you don't have to answer any of those questions. For most students, trying to answer those additional questions hurts their response, specifically their fluency and grammar scores. So why are they on the card? The extra questions are written on the card to remind you to include examples and details in your story. Part 2 is basically a very long part 1 question. It's just another personal question you need to answer, but now for 2 minutes. And IElts knows that this is the most difficult of the 3 speaking parts, which is why they included a few questions as reminders to add detail and answer important questions like who, what, where, when, and why when telling a story. Why are they bad? Let's start with your fluency and coherence score, which is the most important criteria for this task. It's very hard to give a fluent 2-minute response, even for a native speaker, when you are answering 4 random questions related to one topic. For IElts, fluency is graded by connecting different ideas and themes together in a way that makes sense and tells an actual story, which is what the PPF technique does really well. But if you try to answer each of those basic questions on the card, you will sound like a robot because they have no reason to be grouped together if you're supposed to speak for 2 minutes. Second, your grammar will suffer. Look at the suggested questions again. They're all in the present simple. And naturally, we want to answer questions in the tense they're asked in. It's called mirroring, and it's a skill native speakers use. However, you are being graded on your grammatical range and diversity. So answering with the simple grammar from the questions really hurts your grammar score because the examiner wants you to experiment with different tenses. This is why the PPF technique is perfect for part 2. It guarantees you use diverse grammar to satisfy the examiner. And remember, 2 things. First, you only lose points for serious grammar mistakes that cause confusion. And second, everyone makes grammar mistakes during part 2, but almost none of them affect your score. But should you ignore the suggested questions completely? Should you? No, I really don't think so. Looking at the suggested questions can be helpful for quickly thinking of ideas to include in your response, especially if it's a hard topic you didn't practice. They're extremely brief, so you can look at them quickly and use the ones you think are helpful in telling your story. And when you read them, think to yourself, can I use this in the past? Is it better in the present or maybe in the future part of my story? Of course, you don't have to use any of them if you have better things to talk about. But from my experience, the suggested questions often give me good ideas for keywords to write down in my notes. And your notes is what we'll talk about now. How to take great notes and speak easier. You have 1 minute to take notes before speaking. And after practicing together, you'll see how awesome that 1 minute is to speak more fluently and easily for the entire 2 minutes. In the following taking notes lectures, I'll discuss why you must take notes, things you must and must not do, emergency expressions to use if you get lost in your 2-minute response, and finally, how to specifically organize your notes for the PPF technique. Taking notes guarantees a higher score. Your written notes easily organize your response so that you can continue speaking until interrupted by the examiner. That's what we want, for the examiner to say, thank you, that's enough. If the examiner stops you in part 2, that's pretty much a guarantee you did great. I should also mention that when taking notes on paper, 1 minute is enough time to prepare. However, if you try to prepare it in your head, it's not going to help at all. With 1 minute of only mental preparation, you will forget the order and organization of your story, forget important details to include, and stop talking way too early. And as you'll see in the next lecture, I even have some great filler words and expressions you can use to recover from those moments when you forget what you were saying by pretending to use your notes. Anyways, let's continue with the do's and don'ts, the good and bad of note-taking. Do write your direct response first. What are you going to talk about? You need to decide right away the person, place, or thing you're going to discuss. If the question is, what is your most valuable possession? You need to choose one. For me, it's probably my computer. So write it down. If the question is, what is your favorite childhood memory? I choose an important memory, like visiting Belgium, and write it down. This is important because just like in part 1, when you start speaking, you first answer the question you were asked before adding all of the examples and details that make it a good response. And choosing what you're going to talk about should be the quickest thing you do. No time should be wasted deciding what you will talk about. Choose something. Do only write down important words, not sentences. Your notes should not look like a prepared response, so no sentences. Writing sentences is a guaranteed way to lose a lot of points because you will sound unnatural and the examiner will clearly see you doing it. What you should be writing down are only the most important words, what we call keywords, related to the story you are going to talk about. That means important nouns, adjectives, and adverbs that you think will help make it easier to tell your story. Nouns are people, places, things, and ideas. They are the places we visit, people we know, ideas we talk about, movies we watch, and things we own. Adjectives are words that describe nouns. They help us visualize what someone, something, or someplace looks or feels like. As well, they can set the tone for part of a story, meaning if it's going to be happy, sad, angry, nervous, or any other emotion. Adverbs tell us how an action was performed. And when I say action, I mean verbs. Adverbs mostly tell us how quickly, slowly, happily, angrily, sloppily something was done. Notice that adverbs very often end in ly. So write down these keywords, these important nouns, adjectives, and adverbs that quickly remind you the order of things you're talking about in your story so you never get lost. For example, if I use my childhood trip to Belgium, the first ideas that come to my head, the first keywords are plane ride, first time, nervous, and I write them down. Do write down as much as you can. You want to write as much as possible. You have 1 minute, so I recommend that you write as many keywords related to your response as possible. Don't worry, because you don't talk about everything you write down. We just want to make sure you have enough to talk about. And once you start writing, it's much easier to think of new ideas. As you write the keywords down, you're also putting them into a simple outline that helps organize your spoken response. We'll discuss how to spend this whole minute in the lecture Taking Notes, PPF Technique. Do invent stories. Did you already watch the section To Do before test day? Because in the first 2 lectures, I tell you about a great strategy for being able to quickly respond to any question for any part of the speaking exam. And that strategy is creating fake facts, information, and people that you can talk about. You can even create a fake personal history about yourself, other people, things, and places. Or use someone else's story. The examiners only care that you can use good English. They don't care about, nor do they know about you. So if you get a question that's difficult to answer because you don't have enough information or because it's not something you enjoy or experienced, create a story. Invent. You are not being quizzed on your knowledge, experience, or family. You are only being quizzed on how well you can use the English language. So lie if you have to. Create stories and research, exaggerate, and do whatever else you need to do to speak easier and longer. Do use your notes while speaking. The students who score the highest on part 2 use their notes while speaking. Your notes are there to help organize your response so you can remember the order of things you're going to discuss and so you don't forget or repeat certain things. You do not lose points for looking at your notes and using them while speaking. You only lose points for reading entire sentences. That's why you only write down specific keywords that help organize and pace your response. Do not write down full sentences that you're going to repeat out loud. Don't write full responses or full sentences. It's obvious to the examiner when you do this. Plus, you'll lose points for reading prepared statements and it will cause your pronunciation to be unnatural. It's a terrible strategy. Instead, write down important keywords, the nouns, adjectives, and adverbs that guide you through your response and allow you to tell a real story. Don't tell the examiner you are ready. Keep preparing until the examiner tells you to stop. Use every second you have for preparation. Students who say they're ready get lower scores 99% of the time. If your outline is finished, review it. Practice it in your head, organize it mentally, think of extra details or keywords that you can write down. Don't write in your own language. Writing in your own language will confuse you while speaking. It will hurt your fluency and make you translate from your language into English a lot more than you should be. Only write in English. If you can't think of a specific word in English, write a synonym or describe it. Remember this, being able to describe something when you forget its name is an advanced fluency skill. So use it. Don't worry about the examiner looking at your notes. Nothing you write affects your grade. A lot of examiners don't look at you while you're writing your notes. Some of them don't even look at you while you're responding. They might look at their feet or the ceiling. Don't create mind maps. A mind map is a type of diagram where you put the most important keyword in the middle and draw lines to related ideas. So for example, I might put trip to Belgium in the middle and then draw separate lines to plane ride, first time, nervous. This is a good strategy of brainstorming, of thinking of ideas, but not when preparing a 2-minute spoken response in under a minute. That's because a mind map is disorganized and messy. It's not the best way to quickly organize a speech that needs to be coherent and well-structured. I'll give you better ways to organize in the Taking Notes PPF Technique lecture. Emergency vocabulary to use. It happens sometimes. You're doing a great job speaking, telling a great story, when you forget everything. Nothing comes to mind or you don't know how to continue. So what do? I know what you can do. Use one of these 3 native expressions to recover from a moment of confusion during your response. Using these expressions will demonstrate advanced vocabulary because you're using a native expression, and keep your fluency score high by filling in otherwise empty gap with English. Additionally, make eye contact with the examiner and smile when you use them. Don't feel embarrassed because it happens to everyone and you are solving the problem in a smart way. You can also use these during speaking parts 1 and 3. But obviously for those parts, you won't be able to look at your notes when you use them. I'll start with simpler forms of these expressions and show you how you can make them more complex. As well, what to say when you are ready to continue. What was I about to say? What was I about to say is a great expression to use when you can't think of something to say in that moment or genuinely forget. It's quick and can give you an excuse to look over your notes a second longer before continuing to speak without hurting your flow. And if you really need to, you can also make it longer by adding, just 1 second, please. Let me check. And when you're finished, when you're ready to continue, say, oh, that's right. To review, you can simply say, what was I about to say? Or you can make it longer and say, what was I about to say? Just 1 second, please. Let me check. And when you're ready to continue, oh, that's right. And I was quite nervous about it. But that was in the past. And now, what was I about to say? Just 1 second, please. Let me check. Oh, that's right. But nowadays, it's something I'm very comfortable with. For instance, blah, blah, blah. When using these expressions, it's so important to say them clearly while also engaging with the examiner. The examiner will be more easygoing, will be less critical if you use these expressions in a friendly, engaging, and enthusiastic manner. So now, more than ever, remember to smile, make eye contact, and sit up straight. This is the worst time to slouch, mutter, and lose confidence. I totally just blanked. This is a pretty informal expression, but it's still good for IELTS speaking. To blank or blank on something is to forget. So it's a perfect expression for that moment during your speaking when you can't remember what you were going to say next or forget what you were talking about. A longer expression you can use is, I totally just blanked on what I was talking about. Or, I totally just blanked on what I was about to mention. And if you want to be polite, just put, I'm sorry, at the beginning. And when you're ready to continue speaking again, you can use, yes, I remember now. To review, you can simply say, I totally just blanked, or you can make it longer and say, I totally just blanked on what I was about to mention or what I was talking about. And to show you're ready to continue, yes, I remember now. And looking in the future, I'm sorry, I totally just blanked on what I was about to mention. Yes, I remember now. Regarding the future, blah, blah, blah. I lost my train of thought. When someone loses their train of thought, it means they forget what exactly they were talking about or what they were going to mention next. It's a nice way of saying, sorry, I need to collect my thoughts. A longer expression you can use is, I lost my train of thought. Let me check my notes quickly. And when you're ready to continue, give an enthusiastic, yes, of course, and keep going. To review, you can simply say, I lost my train of thought, or you can make it longer by saying, I lost my train of thought. Let me check my notes quickly. And to start speaking again, yes, of course. And like before, if you want to seem extra polite, put a I'm sorry at the beginning. And I grew up in a time when that new technology was just appearing. So when I lost my train of thought, let me check my notes quickly. Oh, yes, of course. When cell phones began to appear, it blah, blah, blah. The key to using these expressions naturally is to practice them out loud. And remember, when you use them, have energy in your voice and be enthusiastic so you can impress the examiner with your native expression and distract them from your moment of confusion. Taking notes, PPF technique. In this lecture, I'm going to show you how to take excellent notes in 1 minute. At the same time, I'm also going to introduce you to the basics of the PPF technique that I've been telling you so much about. First, write your direct response at the top of the paper. Your direct response is what you're choosing to talk about. It is your most basic answer to the question that begins your 2-minute response. This should not take more than 5 seconds because we need all the remaining time spent on preparing your notes. Remember, the information you give related to your response does not need to be accurate, honest, or truthful. Facts do not matter in IELTS speaking. You simply need to be able to talk about one topic for 2 minutes. Keep it simple by inventing and exaggerating when it makes spoken English easier. Here are a few example questions from part 2 and what I write down from my direct response. Describe a book you've read recently. Harry Potter. Okay, the most recent book I read was not Harry Potter. The last time I read Harry Potter was like 10 years ago, but it was the only book I could think of. And I didn't want to waste more time, so I wrote it down. This is one reason you want to look at as many practice questions as possible, so you have time before the test to think of ideas to respond with. But it's alright that I didn't read Harry Potter recently, because remember, the examiner is not grading me for how well I understood the book. When responding, I can create things Harry did, make fake characters, and invent whatever I want so I can speak easier and longer. Describe a musician you like to listen to. Justin Bieber. I do not listen to Justin Bieber, but Justin is a lot easier to talk about than the musicians I actually do listen to. And he's one of the first musicians I thought of. Why is he easier to talk about? Because he's so famous. Justin Bieber is in the news every day. And because of that, I know many things about his personal life, background, music, and future goals. I don't know much about the musicians I actually listen to. And because of that, they are more difficult to talk about. So to save time and to have an easier topic to discuss, I chose Justin Bieber. Describe a place you've visited. France. France is a country famous for tourism, and that's probably why it was the first place I thought of. The question is also more general. It's asking for a place I visited. If it asked for a city, I would want to make sure to answer with the specific city, like Paris. And what I'll show you in the next lecture is how I will start my response by explaining how I visited France or wanted to visit France in the past tense. Then I transition to the present and explain how I'm visiting or planning to visit France this year, present tense. And finally, shift to the future, where I discuss my future predictions about tourism in the country, future tense. This is why the PPF technique is so awesome. It allows you to tell 3 short, easy stories, but the person listening thinks it's one long, complex story. Second, Write 1, 2, 3 down the side of your paper like this. Why are you doing this? Because this is how you are going to organize the 3 parts of your response. 1 is where we talk about a personal past experience related to the topic. With every part 2 question, you can and should, with the PPF technique, start your response in the past. So under 1, write your keywords related to the past part of your story. 2 is where we discuss the topic in the present, like habits, hobbies, things happening now, or what we plan to do in the very near future. So put those important keywords here. And 3 is where we finish in the future with predictions and very distant future plans. Of course, those keywords belong here. When writing your keywords, just to make sure that they are organized in a way that helps you tell your story. Tell it in an easy to understand, logical way. Third, revise and prepare. If the examiner has not told you to stop writing notes yet, then keep going. You can think of more keywords, practice saying the order of your response in your head without your notes, or start rehearsing the beginning of your response. Just don't try to rush and say you're ready. You need all the time available, and anything under 1 minute is not enough. How to go from past to present to future while talking. You can now see how we're going to organize your part 2 response. But to move between the past, present, and future parts I showed you, you're going to need some expressions that will fluently change the focus of your story from one point in time to another. Specifically, that means from past to present to future. And I'll explain that in the lecture in PPF technique, linking vocabulary. But first, let's look more deeply at how to organize and take full advantage of the PPF technique. Time to practice taking notes. In this video, I'm going to give you 5 questions. When each question appears on screen, there will be a quick 5-second countdown. After the 5 seconds, you have 1 minute to prepare your notes. There are also a lot more part 2 questions you can do in section 2C, practice time. If you have any questions or want some feedback on your notes, message me and I'll be glad to help. PPF technique, how to organize part 1. What is the PPF technique? The PPF technique is a strategy that allows you to combine 3 different stories, but related to the same topic by putting one in the past, another in the present, and a final one in the future, which is the natural way we tell stories. A story always starts in the past. That's why we call it the past, present, future technique. And for the examiner listening, it will sound like one well-structured, complex story. Do you need to use all 3 tenses? No, you don't have to, especially if you are finding a lot of extra things to say related to a specific tense. But there are many benefits if you do use them all. Your fluency score will improve greatly because you'll have many more things to talk about, which means less hesitation and be able to switch to the next part of your response whenever you're ready. If you choose to use all 3 tenses, you're also guaranteeing a much higher grammar score by demonstrating grammatical diversity and skill as you begin your response in the past tense, continue to the present tense, and finish in the future tense. If you only stay in 1 or 2 of the tenses, you risk not showing a wider range of grammar knowledge, which will really hurt your score. And I'm teaching you all the grammar you need in this course to perfectly use the PPF technique. So why only benefit from it a little? And finally, by combining 3 different short stories, you are more easily able to speak with a wider range of vocabulary as you subtly change from one story to the next. In the next section of the course, Part 2B, Pronunciation Practice and Advice, I'll give you examples of myself responding to many IElts speaking Part 2 questions and show you my notes on screen as I respond so you can see how I use them. But now, let's look at how to structure your Part 2 response. Number 1, say your introductory sentence in the same tense as the question. You're not given a question exactly for Part 2. Instead, you are given a written request to describe or talk about something. Most often, this request is written in the present perfect, present simple, or past simple, and is the same tense you want to use when telling the examiner what you are going to describe or talk about in your introductory sentence. An introductory sentence is the first sentence in a response that tells the person listening what you are going to talk about. It introduces the topic and includes your direct response. In the last lecture, I told you to write down the topic you're going to talk about at the top of your notes. And in your notes, it should only be the topic, not the whole introductory sentence. So in your notes, you don't write the full introductory sentence. That's a waste of time. But when speaking, you do use a full, complete sentence. To show you how to do this, we're now going to look at some popular Part 2 questions. First, I'll give you my direct response as written in my notes. And second, I'll give you my introductory sentence that starts my spoken response and tells the examiner what I'm going to discuss. Pay attention to how my introductory sentence uses the same tense as the request and copies a lot of the vocabulary. Request. Describe a job you think is beneficial for society. My direct response in notes, police officer. My spoken introductory sentence, a job I think is beneficial for society is a police officer. Request. Talk about a tool you've used to help you study. My direct response in notes, computer. My spoken introductory sentence, a tool I've used to help me study is my computer. Now, let's do some together. After you hear the request, you'll hear this sound. That means pause the video and make your own direct response and introductory sentence. When you're done, press play when you are ready to see my example. Request. Describe a positive change you've experienced in your life. My direct response in notes, eating healthy. My spoken introductory sentence, a positive change I've experienced in my life is eating healthy. Request. Talk about an important moment in your country's history. My direct response in notes, Revolutionary War. My spoken introductory sentence, an important moment in my country's history is the Revolutionary War. Request. Describe a well-known company. My direct response in notes, Apple. My spoken introductory sentence, a well-known company I will describe is Apple. Request. Talk about something you plan to do next weekend. My direct response in notes, park. My spoken introductory sentence, something I plan to do next weekend is go to the park. Request. Describe an important decision you made in your life. My direct response in notes, move abroad. My spoken introductory sentence, an important decision I made in my life was moving abroad. Request. Talk about a festival or celebration you've attended. My direct response in notes, Oktoberfest. My spoken introductory sentence, a festival I've attended is Oktoberfest. Request. Describe a current environmental problem or event. My direct response in notes, global warming. My spoken introductory sentence, a current environmental problem is global warming. Request. Talk about something you would like to learn about in the future. My direct response in notes, coding. My spoken introductory sentence, something I would like to learn about in the future is coding. Request. Describe something healthy you enjoy doing. My direct response in notes, working out. My spoken introductory sentence, something healthy I enjoy doing is working out. Great work so far. I think now you can see that the introductory sentence is quite basic, but we need to make sure to answer it clearly so that we can begin our actual PPF response in the past. If you don't give a clear introductory sentence, the PPF technique does not work because there isn't a clear connection. PPF technique, how to organize, part 2. Number 2, start your response in the past. Now that you have told the examiner what you're going to discuss, we move to the past. The first P in PPF. We use the past tense differently depending on what tense our request was in. Let me explain first, and then I'll review everything to make sure you understand. Number 3, if your request is in the past tense or present perfect. Requests that are in the past tense or present perfect are asking you to focus on something that happened previously, or talk about a person, place, thing, or preference from your past. When talking about the person, place, thing, or preference, you need to discuss, I'm going to refer to them as your subject. So we want to spend most of our time in the past when the request is in the past. It's not totally necessary, but helps make sure we do a better job answering the examiner's question. Ideally, this response spends about 45 seconds in the past, 30 seconds in the present, 30 seconds in the future, and about 15 seconds summarizing. Summarizing your story is more of an optional situation if your story is finished and you have nothing of value to add. To summarize well, you want to review the things you said in order while using slightly different language, not repeating what you already said word for word. As well, when summarizing, you don't want to introduce new information or facts. A summary is just rephrasing, repeating in new language, the most important or interesting things you already talked about. So, if a request asks about the past tense story directly responds to the request and should be the focus of your response, where the majority of time is spent when speaking. Then we switch to the present tense story to talk about the subject nowadays, before making predictions or plans in the future tense and finishing with a brief summary. Here's an example question. Talk about an important moment from your past. The subject I am requested to discuss is an important moment. I know it's related to the past because it says from your past. Other key indicators to look out for are verbs in the past tense. When brainstorming and writing my notes, I first think of an event from the past. Let's say I choose a birthday when I was a little kid, and at this birthday, I received an important gift. In the past, I will talk about receiving the gift, what I thought about it, and its significance to me as a child. For example, if it was a bike, I can explain how it was my first bike, or how the bike got me started in competitive cycling. Then I switch to the present and explain how I continue to cycle today. My enthusiasm for cycling is possible or was started from that past important moment. Maybe I can add other details, like how I now volunteer to teach young kids how to cycle and how much joy it brings me. Next, I take it to the future. I mention my future plans related to cycling, like entering competitions, joining a club, or maybe teaching my children or neighborhood kids how to ride a bike. Finally, I summarize the entire story. The summary is especially nice because it connects the most important information from each of the tenses and parts of my life that I mentioned. And guess what? None of the story is true. Well, not from me. I heard this story from a famous cyclist and how he received a bike for his birthday, even though his family was very poor. Nowadays, he volunteers and is teaching his own children to enjoy the sport. He also discussed his plans for the future, and I used those ideas in my response as well. Number 4, if your request is in the present simple. Requests that are in the present simple will also start in the past. However, the past will not be the focus of our response. The past story is setting up and preparing us for the present tense part of the story. It's introducing and explaining our relationship to or our knowledge about the subject. Then we answer the request specifically in the present tense, while also trying to spend the majority of time in this tense. When we switch to the future to discuss predictions or plans before finishing with a summary. A present request means you should be trying to spend 30 seconds in the past, 45 seconds in the present, 30 seconds in the future, and 15 seconds summarizing. These times are just suggestions to help you map and organize your response. You don't have to respond exactly within these times, but it's helpful for when practicing. Here's an example for a request written in the present. Describe your favorite hobby. This one's easy. In the past, I simply describe how and why I started doing the hobby. Maybe even mention why I enjoyed it. As well, if I didn't do the hobby in the past, I could mention why I didn't or what I did instead. Then I switch to the present and explain why I continue doing it and enjoying it, or if I didn't do it previously, why I started doing it. I could also mention anything that I do differently related to it, things I've learned about it, or even when I'm able to enjoy doing it. And finally, I discuss my future plans, predictions, and ambitions related to this hobby before giving a brief summary to wrap everything up. Number 5, if your request is in a future tense. And finally, some requests can be in the future. These requests are less common but more predictable, asking either for your predictions about the future or plans you have in the future. Because of the future emphasis, you'll see yourself spending about 30 seconds in the past, 30 seconds in the present, 45 seconds in the future, and 15 seconds summarizing. When asked to make predictions, the past tense is used to describe how things were previously, to show history or past trends. The present tense is used to show current trends and how things are right now. The future tense is where you make your predictions, where you talk about what the future will be like or how it might be different. And finally, your summary reviews everything and highlights why your prediction is likely to be true. A prediction question might look like this. Describe how living abroad in the future could change your life. The prediction we're asked to describe is how living abroad in the future will impact us. You know we have to start in the past, but what can we mention? Living abroad is simply a change in surroundings. So I can start by mentioning how my family moved in the past and how this affected me. This could simply be moving to a different neighborhood in the same city, or it could be moving abroad already in the past. A slightly different approach is to mention what I gained or lost by having or having not lived abroad previously. The present tense story can focus on things I lack or am not able to do or experience by not living abroad. As well, it can highlight what I am currently doing to ensure that I will be able to live abroad, the hard work I am putting into this endeavor. And finally, I use the future to predict how things will be different by living abroad, how this future experience will alter my future self. When asked about future plans, the past tense is used to talk about your previous experiences or lack of previous experiences related to something you plan to do in the future. Then we go to the present to discuss why you do or don't do it currently or enjoy doing it. The future is used to focus on when you plan to do it, why you're planning to do it, and how it'll be the same or different in the future. And like always, a quick summary to restate some of your most important details. Here's an example for future plans. Talk about what you plan to be doing in 5 years. This request is asking you to describe what you will be doing for work in 5 years. Though, if you're a student, it could also be asking about academics. Of course, to start, I'm in the past. I'm starting in the past to explain my work history and where I come from professionally. If I had a very difficult background, this can be to illustrate the things I've achieved. More closely related to the request, however, I might want to highlight how I have progressed related to my work so far until the present. Then I discuss my current job, which can include my responsibilities, what I like or don't like, and what I'm currently doing to prepare for the future. Then I switch to the future. I discuss my future prediction based on the past and present evidence I've already shown. You see, everything's related. The past explains the present, and the present explains the future. And finally, I summarize. To review, number 1, start with a clear introductory sentence. This is to help make sure you are answering exactly what was asked. And likewise, tells the examiner that you know what you are doing. It shows confidence and ability. Number 2, always start your response in the past. In IElts Speaking Part 2, you are telling a story, and every good story starts in the past. By starting in the past, continuing to the present, and finishing in the future, you are guaranteeing a higher grammar score and more fluent, coherent story. Number 3, pay attention to the tense your request is written in. If your describe or talk about request is written in the past, it's a clear indication that you should try to spend more time in the past compared to the other parts of your story. It's the same if your request is written in the present simple or one of the future tenses. Now that you understand how the PPF technique is used, how to organize your tenses, and what type of information to talk about in each of the 3 tenses, let's look at linking vocabulary to start your story, change between tenses, and introduce a summary.